Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give this a few minutes to let the Zoom webinar populate with all the attendees. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Thank you.
Okay, welcome everyone to our webinar with CCIM and BOMA Hawaii. I'm Corinne Hiramoto with James Campbell Company and the 2020 Program Chair for BOMA Hawaii. We hope you all are staying well. I'm glad that you could join us today for our joint webinar on 2020 Legislative Review. At this time, we would like to give a big mahalo to our 2020 Platinum sponsors, ABM, Belfour Property Restorations, Interstate Hawaii, MD Restoration, Pacific Rim and Glass Tinting, Premier Restoration Hawaii, and SP Plus. At this time, we'll go ahead and pass this over to Tina Yap of CCIM, who will make a few announcements as well.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. We just want to say thank you. I'm going to try to go back to our sponsors. We want to thank our sponsors also, our Platinum, Gold, and Silver. Without you all, we could not make this year a success. So thank you so much. We have some upcoming events. We have a two-part series, Technology and Real Estate. Part 1 is Site to Do Business on September 9th. And that flyer has gone out. We have our CI 103, Part 2 of Technology and Real Estate, and then a CE class, 3 hours CE credit, Essentials of Commercial Leases on September 30th. Corinne, would you like to talk about BOMA's upcoming events?
Sure, sorry, sorry, Tina. We have a joint webinar with ASHRAE on September 10th, and that's going to be a late afternoon event for us. So that'll be nice as everyone winds down their day. And on September 16th, we will be having a lunch and learn, our monthly one. So that will be on September 16th.
Great. Thank you, Corinne. We do have some housekeeping rules. That's a couple of slides back, so I'll just go over them. Please post your questions in the Q&A box. Depending on your device, it will either be at the top or the bottom of your screen. Do not post questions in the chat. And we are recording today's webinar. Okay. And now a plea for those of you who have been on our webinars before, you know that CCIM is trying to make a wish come true. And you know it's been very difficult to grant wishes this year. But when we're ready to start granting wishes again, we want to have raised our goal of $12,500. So we know things are tough for everybody right now, but if you can make a donation, we would love for you to do that. And the chapter is matching those donations. You can see the website there. I will post that in the chat and you'll get a follow-up email as well. So if you can donate, please do. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jennifer Tom, who will introduce our moderator.
Hello, everyone. Mike Yosa, our moderator today, is a partner in the, oh, sorry. Let's do this. Can you hear me? Okay.
Good morning, Lieutenant Governor.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor, how are you?
Ahead.
And let me start again. Mike, our moderator, is a partner in the Government and Public Affairs Group and the Commercial and Real Estate Litigation Group at Imanaka Asato. He has successfully worked with clients from a variety of industries on legislative issues at the local, state, and federal levels. Prior to joining the firm, Mike served as the Assistant Attorney General for the Government of Samoa, where he represented the territorial government in various legal transactions and civil actions. Mike currently serves as a member of the Stadium Authority, chairing the Audit Committee, and is a member of the Board of Directors of NACOA, the official booster club of the Rainbow Warrior football program. His work with NACOA is especially meaningful to him since he was the defense captain for the Rainbow Warriors under Coach June Jones. Michael also serves as a member of the Legislative Committee for the American Resort Development Association and was selected to be a part of the 2016 class of the Pacific Century Fellows. Mike received his law degree and MBA from Brigham Young University and his Bachelor of Arts from the University of Hawaii, Manoa. Thank you, Michael, and aloha.
You're muted, Michael.
There we go. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having us here today to CCIM and BOMA. We're really excited to be here. We're so lucky to have with us today two very distinguished guests, Lieutenant Governor Josh Green and Senator Stanley Chang. And I will be doing an introduction of these guys real quickly, but I wanted to talk briefly before we get started about some of the legislative session. It was a unique one, and just wanted to kind of touch base on that a little bit. Typically, about 2,000 to 3,000 bills are introduced every year. And we had a unique session this year because it started off as normal in January, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic that we're all enduring right now, there was a recess in March. The session reconvened again in May and recessed again, and then finally reconvened a second time in June and finished up in July, around July 10th. So as you can imagine, Senator Chang and his colleagues have had an extra long year this year and are probably still very active in doing some follow-up work in their districts. Typically in a legislative session of the 2,000 to 3,000 bills that are introduced, about 10% are passed. So you'll have maybe 200 to 300 bills passed each year. This year, again, was a unique situation where the legislature had to focus on the high priority bills. And so only about 82 bills were passed. So, in the past, as I've met with CCIM, we've done a legislative review on some of the major issues. We had a little bit more to talk about. This year, it's kind of a unique situation. So I did want to point out a couple bills that may be of interest to CCIM and BOMA members. The first one being HB 1846, which is a bill that passed the legislature and I believe is on the governor's desk for signature. And that would be a bill that would implementing energy saving measures for state buildings and require some of the agencies to retrofit to make sure that they're maximizing energy and water efficiency. It's important because even though it's limited to state buildings at this point, it could be a measure that is passed on to private buildings if it's successful at the state level. In addition, of course, we had HB 2200, which was our state budget, and a couple other budget-related bills that were passed, SB 3139 and HB 2500. Another bill of interest that did not pass was HB 2605 and its companion SB 2697, which was the REIT bill we've discussed in the past. And this bill would disallow dividends paid deductions. And HB 1520, which was another energy consumption benchmarking bill for private buildings. Really briefly on the Honolulu City Council level, there's two bills of interest that are currently going through the council. The first one is Council Bill 2, which is a comprehensive update to the parking and loading requirements in the land use ordinance. And it would have two kind of measures of interest to most folks are the unbundled parking, which has received a little bit of publicity in the news recently, which would, under the current version, which would not allow parking stalls to be sold with individual units. In addition, there are some setback requirements that would be required for new buildings being constructed. And the second council bill is Bill 69, which is a bill that was introduced in 2018 and which would provide a separate real property tax classification for vacant rental homes. So vacant homes. If a home is vacant for a certain period of time, it would actually be reclassified as a home under different real property tax classifications. So that's a very high level overview of just a couple bills. Of course, if there's particular questions on any bills, I'm happy to answer those questions. Feel free to email me or contact Jennifer to get in touch with me. Okay, so now on to the real meat of our program. Again, we are so privileged to have Lieutenant Governor and Senator Chang be here to take some time out of their busy schedules and to talk a little bit about what's going on in our state. So just to get started, a brief introduction. Many of you know Lieutenant Governor Green, and for those of you who don't, you probably haven't been watching much TV because he's been everywhere trying to provide information to the public about what's going on, how the state's addressing different issues, and what are the next steps and how are we going to get our state back on track. Lieutenant Governor Green has a long history of public service. He after graduating medical school, he moved to Hawaii to serve as a family doctor and emergency doctor on the Big Island, where he continues to practice even as we speak. He's continued to practice with Kona Community Hospital, which I don't know how he fits it all in his schedule. He's a very busy guy. He started in the legislature back in 2004 as a state house representative from Kona, and served there until 2008, at which time he was elected as the state senator from the district. And he served as the state senator from 2008 to 2018, at which point he was elected as our lieutenant governor. And he has served there for the past 2 years. During his legislative duties, he served in a variety of capacities, including as the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. And since taking over as lieutenant governor, he has really been spearheading the state's efforts in addressing the homeless pandemic that we're suffering through as a state. In addition to, since March, taking over as the lead for the administration on COVID-19. As I mentioned, Lieutenant Governor Green continues to practice as a medical doctor. He's also a loving husband and father of 2, and you can catch him on a number of different venues, continually updating citizens of Hawaii on things that are happening. The most recent of which is a Facebook Live talk story, which Lieutenant Governor Green is hosting with Dr. Fauci, which is going to be tomorrow at 7 a.m. And I believe that information will be available on the slides if anyone needs to find out where that is. So thank you for joining us, Lieutenant Governor Green. We also have with us Senator Stanley Chang. He is the senator from District 9, which is East Honolulu, encompassing Hawaii Kai and Kahala. He has been serving in that capacity since 2016, when he took over from the former Senator Sam Sloan. Senator Chang also has a long history of public service. He has been in the state legislature, in the city council from 2010, and he served as council member of the district until being elected in 2016 to serve in the state senate. Senator Chang is a proud local boy and Iolani graduate, where he attended high school. Following Iolani, he attended Harvard College, graduating magna cum laude, and also Harvard Law School cum laude. So he's a very bright individual as well. And he practiced law at Cade Shetty, specializing in real estate. So thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us today. I'd like to give just a couple minutes to both of you to sort of give us a state of the state and what are some of the things that you guys are working on right now. So let's start with Lieutenant Governor Green.
You're muted, Governor.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Governor.
There we go. Sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you very much. Great to see you all, and great to see you, Stanley. We co-chaired a committee back a couple years ago, and it's fantastic. You're our star. So let me give you a little bit of an update. Obviously, I'm working on COVID pretty nonstop right now. 277 new cases today. Active number of cases is 4,921. It's enormously problematic because what happens with COVID, and it is a serious disease. I spent an hour and a half this morning over at Queens Hospital at the intensive care unit and then in the ER with our Surgeon General, showing him what we're up against so they can bring extra resources to us. The challenge is that we are seeing between 8 and 11% of all active cases result in hospitalizations. So we will get about 500 hospitalizations coming in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Just put my doctor hat on. 2 to 3 weeks after a person gets infected, that's when the inflammation, swelling starts in the lungs or the other organ systems, and you end up in the hospital. Sometimes sooner, but often that long. So right now, with 291 people in the hospital, we are essentially at capacity, although we have some surge capacity, but we can't surge the number of personnel into Hawaii very easily. And now we're going to face 500 additional hospitalizations. So if I may be blunt, 13 days ago, I asked the governor to go to orange, which is short of a full lockdown, but that's the safer at home, where you can still go out, you can still pick up food, we can still go to work, but everyone else stays at home unless we're out exercising. And if you want to know the truth, exercising outdoors is not dangerous. Collecting large numbers of people, gathering in outdoors is, of course, a big risk, but gathering indoors is much more worrisome. One study out of Japan showed that gatherings indoors, like in a restaurant indoors, was 19 times more infectious, risky than being in a restaurant setting outdoors. So just to give people that idea. As of today, we've got 54 individuals in our intensive care unit. Usually about 40% of people from an ICU setting like this could succumb and die. We have 51 fatalities, which still amazingly leaves us with the lowest mortality rate in the country. But that may change because of this surge of cases. Another problem, which I was sharing with our Surgeon General, Dr. Adams, and by the way, if I know everyone's busy, but today at 2 on my Facebook, we're going to do a Facebook Live for a half hour with Dr. Adams, and he's a very good guy as the Surgeon General. He pointed out that we now, because of our caseload today, and we did 2,518 tests, we have a positivity rate of 11%, highest that we've experienced. That is a problem because that puts us into what's classified as the red zone. Between 10% and upward is a highest risk spread rate. 5 to 10% medium risk, then under 5% tends to be safer. And that's where we were. We were there in March, April, May. We, as you know, in May had almost no cases, and we now are nostalgic about having just 30 cases because we've been averaging 250 a day. Why is this disconcerting? Because we had an opportunity to stop it in its tracks. The way to do it, if I may be blunt, was to have a contact tracing and testing team fully operational, 30 per 100,000 individuals, maybe max out at 40 per 100,000 individuals. That means 420 to 564 people should be on that job full time. Unfortunately, Dr. Park did not feel that was a priority and didn't get that done while we all were kind of screaming from the top of the mountain. And I'm sorry to be direct, but this is a direct time. This is a time when we've got people in the hospital and the intensive care unit, and I'm not playing around with that. Not politics, not anything. So where do we go now? As you heard yesterday, they did heed the partial call to get it straight. The previous orders were not adequate to gather in small numbers. They're adequate in general, but not when you have a full spread going on. So where does this take us? It takes us to a shutdown for 2 weeks. If we're going to be honest with each other, it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks to see a significant, like, bottoming out of the viral load if we do a good job, which we can. We absolutely can. We, in fact, did it successfully in May. So it's absolutely doable. And we need to do that so that we can open our businesses again. We need to do that so we can open up our intensive care unit beds again. Because some people who were very upset with me in the last day or two said, they gave me a lot of grief about any shutdown, saying that only affects a small percentage of us. Well, that's not accurate. If you have a heart attack somewhere on Oahu and you get diverted from Queens Hospital or Straub, believe me, it affects you. If you are an individual that's suffering from cancer and you normally needed chemotherapy, but now a chemotherapy ward has to be closed because they've had to repurpose all of their staff to the ICU, believe me, it affects you. So there are obviously many effects that affect all of us. The impact is great. It's greatest on those who first have COVID, and second greatest, of course, those who have small businesses and are trying to survive. And for both of those groups, my heart breaks, but my recommendation is to get through it by going on offense, which is to say, shut down temporarily and firmly rather than letting this burn kind of at a slow boil, taking us all down week after week. And I hope that people will take to heart that we have to wear masks and be completely isolated from others for a short time. Then we come through it. We take this time to build our healthcare capacity out again. I'm working with innumerable partners to make sure we have more beds and more people, and we'll be okay. All culminating with a vaccination in the coming months. I expect November, December, you'll start seeing it peek its head over the horizon, and then come New Year, we'll probably get it. And I'll just wrap with this, a couple quick clarifications. Thank you for the shout out. Dr. Fauci had surgery on his vocal cords, and so he had to postpone a few weeks. We're going to get together with Fauci in early October, but we will have the Surgeon General today at 2 p.m. If people are interested, go to my Facebook. It's Lieutenant Governor Josh Green, or the @LTGov Josh Green. And I'll try to be there for you all as much as possible as your Lieutenant Governor. I've tried to reinvent this office to be of some meaning and import. I know I can't be right all the time, and I apologize for that, but I will be fiercely protective of our lives and our kupuna's lives as we go through this crisis. So thank you again for welcoming me.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Chang?
How can I follow such a thorough presentation from Lieutenant Governor Green, who I've had the pleasure of serving as his vice chair on the Human Services Committee when he was throwing out some of the best ideas to tackle the homelessness crisis that our state had seen recently. And I wanted to thank you, Lieutenant Governor Green, for your leadership in this crisis. I think it's clear that you are the most trusted voice in Hawaii at this moment, and I learned quite a lot in your brief presentation just now. I also wanted to thank the folks here at CCIM for inviting me to be here today. I guess Lieutenant Governor Green did such a great job covering the current situation with the coronavirus that maybe I'll just briefly say that with respect to the state, as Mike already mentioned, there has been very little legislative action over the past year, but we anticipate at least one more special session. We know we'll have to go back into special session to confirm some judges, including a Supreme Court justice. And we're all hoping to go back into special session to deal with a potential future relief bill from Congress. There had been glimmers of hope earlier in the year that Congress would be able to pass another CARES Act. That hasn't happened yet. It doesn't seem like we're going to get one until next month at the earliest. But as you folks all know, the CARES Act funds and many of the provisions have already expired at this point, including the Unemployment Plus Up. And the state is in a dire revenue shortage. Based on the estimates that I've seen, we're looking at about a $2 billion hole out of about a $14 billion budget, which is, too large for any accounting tricks or any of the kind of typical tactics that have been used to balance the budget without seeing some real pain. The governor, in recent news has been talking about 20% or 10% furloughs, which would be 1 day every 2 weeks. He's also been talking about layoffs and elimination of programs. Now, as much as we would all like to come out and categorically oppose layoffs and furloughs, the reality is that without additional federal help, there is such a large budget gap that our hands are pretty much tied. The state can borrow money through some of the emergency provisions and other lifelines that are out there, but it doesn't look like state tax revenues are going to be picking up anytime in the near future. So borrowing money doesn't seem to be a great strategy to get ourselves out of this either. So it's going to be a very lean situation, I think, in the foreseeable future with the state legislature. My hope is that we will take an opportunity to as they say in politics, to not let a crisis go unwasted. And my hope is that we use this opportunity to seriously look at our affordable housing shortage. We all know that we've had a serious affordable housing shortage in our state for decades, at least as long as any of us on this call have been alive. I've read reports going back to the days of statehood about this issue. And the basic problem is that we haven't been building enough to meet demand, not just the demand of people who are relocating here from other places, but also just the demand of the natural increase in population. The 8,000 additional births that we have every year over the number of deaths that we have every year, those are all local people. And we've only been building about 2,000 units a year. So there's a yawning gap that expands every single year. And the real estate market for residential real estate on the mainland is red hot right now. Even in Hawaii, prices have remained very stable, if not increasing. We have record low supply of residential real estate on the market today. And what that shows me is that this is a low-hanging fruit for our economic recovery, because we know that we need the housing. We know that the demand for it is still there, even now during the pandemic. And it's a great way to put jobs, put people back to work in the short term rather than long term. So I'll just leave it at that. And I know we have a lot of questions, so I look forward to talking more in the future.
Yes, thank you, Senator. I appreciate both you and Senator and Lieutenant Governor Green's comments. I see we have a couple questions to begin with, so I'm just going to fire away, and maybe we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor. Can you kind of give us an overview of what the stay-at-home order means, and specifically whether or not you can associate with other folks that you live with under these orders?
Yes, so the stay-at-home is meant to be 2 weeks starting midnight as it becomes Thursday. Full stay-at-home except for what is absolutely necessary. You, of course, can be with your loved ones, your family members. You can go out for takeout. You can go out to grocery shop, go out for healthcare, but you should work from home for 2 weeks. It's just Oahu in case we happen to have any individuals from the neighbor islands where the rates are much lower. There have been a few cases that have been surging on Big Island and Maui, but still comparatively much lower number. You should not go out for any non-essential things. Not obviously, do not go out to the beach or to parks or what have you. Really stay at home for 2 weeks. And that is the essential simplicity of the measure. If you do go out, you must wear a mask. Please wear a mask wherever you go, unless you have a health condition that prevents it. And that amount of restriction, while terribly onerous, for 2 weeks will work. We do allow for some small exemptions. The mayor allows for church exemptions, so people can go to church provided they're masked and they follow the rules of churches to minimize the number of the size of gatherings. But no sporting events, no in dining, no gyms, none of that. And it's tough. In fact, I would go so far as to say I hate it. And I would much prefer the one notch up from that, which is safer at home, where you can do a little bit more. So let's hope that we can move to that in 2 weeks. That if the numbers start trending down, perhaps I'll be able to convince the governor to just do that, where it's less restrictive, but quickly begins to open our lives up a little bit. The truth of it is we're not doing much economically right now anyway, as Senator Chang points out very eloquently, and I just think the world of Stanley. This is a time to knock these cases down, because unfortunately the tail on this dragon follows us 2 weeks later, and that means exactly 2 weeks from now you'll see me hustling more at the hospital while the case counts come down. And that's good news for society, but it will be tough on the hospitals. So that's basically the rules. There have to be some clarifications, I believe, from the mayor's office. There is still in place the travel quarantine between Oahu and the neighbor islands. you have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine if you've traveled and touched down here on Oahu. They're trying to keep their cases down very low. You can get exemptions for essential work if you're a healthcare provider, what have you. But even then, we're putting in some extra restrictions and getting tests and so on. So that's kind of the lay of the land. I would go to the website, and there is one other provision that does allow people to be out, and that's to get the free testing that's available. The free testing today, which I understand, which is ending today, so don't worry about today. You're gonna have 12 days worth of this from the Surgeon General. It's just the anterior nose. I'll say it again, so it's very easy. It's not that terrible feeling test if you've had one. Today we were at Kaneohe District Park and Leeward Community College, and we're going to try to go all over Oahu to give free tests. If people want to register, you go to doineedacovid19test.com, doineedacovid19test.com, and you can click there and see where the next sites are going to be. Look, free tests are good, and they should help inform us where the cases are. And let's get through this as soon as possible. I need to be reporting cases under triple digits so that we can get ahead of this.
Thanks so much, Lieutenant Governor. I know you've got to leave probably right about now. Do you have time for just one more question?
I do. Let me push at least till 12:45 because I appreciate hearing Stanley too.
Oh, perfect. Great. So this may be for both of you actually. Then there's love to hear your thoughts on, given that there's a mandate for wearing face masks in public places. There's been a question about how do you respond when an individual cites their rights under the Disabilities Act to not wear a mask? How do you respond to still be able to protect the retailers and employees and other customers that are around this person?
Stanley, may I, a quick one, and then I'll turn it over to you. If someone has legitimate health consideration, then they do not need to wear a mask. And the retailer or the business owner will be wearing a mask, so they'll be protected quite well. And if there's active illness that they are worried about from that person, they can refuse service based on the consideration of the health of their own employees. But there are some circumstances. People with chronic lung disease have a difficult time wearing a mask. Some people with significant developmental disabilities where they've had just really significant musculoskeletal problems, very bad cerebral palsy, make it very difficult to wear a mask. The likelihood, though, in a short encounter, less than 15 minutes with somebody, if you're not within 6 feet of them, of catching it is utterly low. And if you yourself are wearing a mask, you don't have to worry.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Chang, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think the Lieutenant Governor did a great job summarizing it. I'll also add that I just read an interesting article in The Atlantic about the importance of ventilation and how it hasn't been publicized well enough that most of the clusters have been indoors in areas of poor ventilation. There was an example that was cited where an air conditioning unit was blowing air across in a restaurant in China at one person who was infected, and all the people behind that person also got infected because of the way that the air circulated. So the importance of having good ventilation is whether or not people are wearing masks, but especially in a time like this, that's perhaps one aspect that's under discussed that we should be focusing on as a best practice for our safety.
Excellent, thank you. Great ideas. One additional medical related question that just popped up. Can you explain the difference between asymptomatic, how you become asymptomatic, and how long are you asymptomatic for?
Sure. So as many as 40% of people who catch COVID are asymptomatic, meaning they have no symptoms whatsoever. And there is a different term, pre-symptomatic, meaning just the days before you become symptomatic, before you get fever or shortness of breath or cough. So the average length of time from the time that an individual gives it to someone else is about You give it to them, but you don't see symptoms usually for 5 to 5.5 days. Sometimes after about 5 days, symptoms usually come. In the 2 days before that, you would be pre-symptomatic and probably infectious. And then usually for 5 to 7 days, you would still be infectious with the virus. That's for most people, about 60% of the people who have symptoms. And that doesn't mean you're going to the hospital. It just means you're having cough, shortness of breath, or the many other symptoms that come with it. And then comes that asymptomatic group, which in many cases is younger people. You never manifest any symptoms, yet you have the virus. And we've believed that those individuals are less infectious, but they're not without the capacity to spread the disease. And because they completely don't know that they are walking around COVID positive, they haven't restricted their patterns of behavior whatsoever. They're still out there, maybe at school, maybe at work, spreading the disease because they're up close to people. So that is a problem. And one of the reasons to do mass testing and testing all close contacts of people that are positive is to catch some of those asymptomatic people and have them also be isolated for 2 weeks. It decreases spread. That's the best way to really get ahead of this. Contact tracing and testing is critical, and it's why the Senate rose up and really called out the Department of Health, and appropriately so.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Senator Chang, maybe this is a question for you, given your experience in the real estate industry. You know, every industry has been affected by the shutdown statewide, but real estate being such a big part of, especially commercial real estate being such a big part of the state's economy, how do you balance the shutdown or a decision on the shutdown versus kickstarting the economy again, especially when you consider that you know, real estate is affected by retail, by residential units, by commercial trying to pay rent, and that in turn affects the counties when they collect real property taxes.
Well, here I would want to echo what Lieutenant Governor Green has said, in that it's a little bit counterintuitive, but what the empirical experience of a number of other countries has shown is that if you shut down, the stricter the lockdown, and the more the more the virus is brought under control, to a point where, as we saw in May, there was very little community spread. The moment that we can be completely sure that there's no community spread, which will take time and which will take a very severe and very strict lockdown, the faster that we can go back to a more normal situation. I know probably many of us have already seen photos of a rave party happening in Wuhan, China, which is pretty amazing as the epicenter of the pandemic, that the local authorities would permit a gathering like that. But that just goes to show you how normal life is in China right now. Now, they had an extremely strict lockdown, a lockdown that probably the United States could never have, where there were, armed people and, armed police in the streets. People could only leave their apartments once every week to buy food. But that level of strictness was sufficient to bring down the community spread low enough that they can now have the confidence to pretty much go back to their normal lives. Now, I don't know that we will be able to achieve that strict of a shutdown, but I would say that the deeper the pain quickly, the more we can have that V-shaped recovery that we're all hoping for.
Excellent, thank you. Lieutenant Governor, as you've also been heavily involved in making those decisions, how do you balance the need for recovery versus the safety and shutdown?
I think I would echo what Senator Chang says. I'll give you the medical metaphor is rip the bandage off and do it fiercely and get it off of there, because the faster you get to the core of recovery, the faster you can really get going again positively. And it's not rocket science. It's absolutely easy to stop the spread of the virus if people are all on the same page, which is to say universal mask wearing, no joke, no two ways about it. and no significant gatherings for a period of 4 weeks. If you do that, the virus dies out to a very low level. And fortunately, it's not just a phantom statement. It actually worked here. And then we can have lots of other mitigating capacities to help, like when we bring back tourism, which must come back, obviously, for our economic health. You can do it. You get people tested. There are airports all over the world doing a rapid test at the airport. It's not that difficult. Or a test in advance, or simply making sure that they adhere to masks also. So a lot of those things can be done. I just say don't tinker. We saw a lot of tinkering for about 5 or 6 weeks. Little rule here, little rule there. Meanwhile, the cases were really mounting since mid-July, and we're now here mid-August. I mean, it seems like a long time. It's really been about 40 days that got us to this point. So that's also a cautionary tale. Win this battle now in these next couple weeks, and then don't lose it again, because within 40 days you could get back to another circumstance again, and repeated shutdowns will be difficult on people. I think people will ultimately tolerate this one because we have little choice. I mean, there's just too many cases at the hospital right now, but people are going to have to get back to regular life because people are suffering some depression at home. There are some other social issues that are really difficult to deal with. It's tough on children to not be in school. There are parents of children with disabilities that they need that socialization at schools. There's a lot of things that have to happen. For a couple months, we can deal with it. For many months, we cannot.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think it is important for everyone to just pitch in and follow the orders, stay at home as much as you can, and try and get through this in the next 3 to 4 weeks so we can get back to normal life as fast as possible.
Yes.
Thank you. A quick question for you, Senator. Do you anticipate any bills being introduced either at the special session or the 2021 session related to how businesses handle COVID?
It's hard to say. My guess is that this year, a special session will really primarily focus on appropriation of the funds. Next year would be the time for bigger picture thinking. But given what you started out with, Mike, that the passage rate of bills that are introduced is 10% or even less, I wouldn't expect a lot of movement even in 2021, because I think people, the reality is the state's economic, the fiscal picture of the state of Hawaii will still be very bleak. There will be very few opportunities to spend money that the state will have. And I don't know how, I don't know how much the state will be able to do in terms of regulations in a 2021 regular session. I certainly haven't seen any regulatory proposals or bills that are passed in other states that could approach something like a consensus level that it really takes to move bills through the legislature. But it's a work in progress, and we'll see what happens over the next few months as other states tackle the same issues that we're tackling. Like I said, I'm personally hoping for more action on affordable housing as a way to get our economy back in gear, to take this opportunity to put people back to work. And I'm hoping that this will be the year to actually move the needle on that, because there are so few other options to stimulate new economic sectors.
Absolutely. Construction industry is one of the ones that's probably going to have to be relied upon to help in economic recovery. Thank you. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Aloha Homes program you introduced this past year. But I know Lieutenant Governor Green has to go pretty soon, so let me just thank him for being a part of this this webinar today. We really appreciate you and everything you're doing on behalf of our state. So on behalf of CCIM and BOMA members, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. I'll keep trying. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Senator Chang, to kind of pivot back to what you've been discussing now, as you mentioned, affordable housing, homelessness has really been at the core and the top priority for our state for so many years now. Can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the Aloha Homes program and what you think some opportunities are, especially during this COVID-19, where we see so many homeless that have nowhere to go and have a difficult time in quarantine and isolation. What policies are we putting in place to be able to kind of address their needs?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think we have, I think we can all agree that we've had a decades-long housing shortage here in Hawaii, that we've been building far less housing supply than we have demand for. And my hope is that we'll take this opportunity to expand supply. But as we all know, there is a really pervasive attitude in Hawaii that, we live in a very special environment, that we don't want just rampant, uncontrolled development and construction like we have in the past, like we've had in the past. So much so that even projects that we might think of as having gone through the entire process, like a Sherwoods or like a TMT, have met with really strong community opposition. And as we've seen in TMT and Sherwoods and some of these other cases, if you have people who are literally willing to risk their lives by lying across roads or blocking fences and that kind of thing, it's not like the government has a lot of great options at that point. And so, in my mind, the biggest hurdles that we need to overcome are the hurdles of the population of Hawaii. At the end of the day, the voter is always right. And so we have to try to think of ways to build housing in such a way that we won't meet such strong objections from the community. And, if we were just to throw out some of the frequent community objections that we hear that we don't want to develop new, greenfield agricultural or conservation land. We don't want to sell units just to, wealthy overseas investors. We want to make sure that they go to our local people. We want to make sure that housing is actually reasonably priced so that most people can afford it, that it's not just affordable to the very wealthy. We want to make sure that enforcement of owner occupancy restrictions is really tight so that you don't have people renting them out for vacation rental purposes. And, what we tried to do is to take all of those objections into account, because I think they are reasonable objections, and to package them into a program called Aloha Homes, which stands for Affordable Locally Owned Homes for All. And so the core of the program is we would take existing state-owned parcels on the rail line that are already urbanized. So we wouldn't be taking 1 inch of, agricultural or conservation lands. We would develop them with really high density so that we wouldn't need a lot of suburban sprawl. They would be, car-free essentially, so we wouldn't be adding to the traffic on the roads. They would be built and sold for essentially the cost of construction, so that there would be no taxpayer subsidy, so that taxpayers wouldn't need to pay more. As we know, we're all stretched right now. But that they would be sold for what it would cost to build, which means that they would, be probably in the 300,000 and plus range for a family of 4, which gets us to a magical number of $1,500 a month, which is what the majority of the people of Hawaii say is an affordable monthly mortgage or rental payment. And then to address some of the concerns with existing government housing, where we have a lot of problems with the concentration of poverty, cyclical poverty, violence, and so on that results from that, to open up the buyer pool to people of all incomes, much the way that our public schools, our public parks, our public highways are today. We won't have, income caps with AMI restrictions and that sort of thing. If Pierre Omidyar wanted to live in one of these, $300,000 units side by side with a formerly homeless family, he would be able to do so, because after all, there would be no taxpayer subsidy. It would create a totally new form of housing. It would be committed to building enough housing to meet demand, so that every Hawaii resident would know that they would be in some ways entitled to one of these units. That's currently the way things are in Singapore, where even the very rich are entitled to a public housing unit at a very reasonable price. And, you know, it would involve really dramatic density. So let me be upfront about saying that proposals will come out to do, 100 towers of 50 stories each at Aloha Stadium. That is the scale of density that we're talking about. And that might be shocking to people. That certainly would strike people as, not contextual when it comes to the surrounding environment. And those are all reasonable and legitimate concerns. But I would say at the end of the day that because the number of births of just local people in Hawaii is exceeding the number of deaths by at least 8,000, and if we make the unrealistic assumption that all 8,000 of these new people will get married to each other and stay married to each other, creating 4,000 new couples or households that will need housing every year, realizing that we only build about 2,000 or fewer housing units every year, I would just say that, if we're not able or willing to undertake some really large and dramatic housing supply construction along these lines, that we are going to have to tell our young people when they do graduate from high school that they have to leave. They cannot come back. Hawaii will not be their home and will never be their home again because we have made the policy decision to never build them a home. And that is, to me, the most unacceptable outcome when it comes to our housing supply, to force local people to leave because we are consciously making the decision to not build enough housing to accommodate the natural increase in population. So it is, a really bold and dramatic plan. We have a number of bills at the legislature that would bring this idea to fruition, but the reality is that I wouldn't anticipate something like this coming to true fruition, that, the first keys wouldn't be handed to the first residents for several more years. So we're just hoping at the legislature to enable, something, the first steps to be taken.
Thank you, Senator. I agree with your approach. I think something dramatic has to happen in order to get in the situation under control. And as you mentioned also, it's might be the right time given the fact that we do need economic recovery, we need jobs. And so maybe people are more willing to take a little bit broader approach to it than they would have in the past. I do notice that there have been a number, thank you everybody for the questions, but there's been a number of questions around enforcement. So let me just shift back to the stay-at-home order, or the safer at home order, and ask you, what is the state and the county's efforts to really ramp up enforcement? It seems as though in the past there's been some orders and people have ignored them. What are we going to do differently this time to make sure that these orders are enforced?
I think we're already starting to see the difference, which is that the HPD is getting serious about issuing citations. They, as we've seen in the daily news, they're issuing citations now in the hundreds or even thousands, and where people would formerly be simply warned about their situations, HPD is actually now making citations and really getting tough and really cracking down on these violations. They've set up hotlines and email addresses to report violations, so that if you are aware of a violation happening in your vicinity, you can make that report. Those cases, the number of calls has been going down in recent days, but I do think that it's important that the community know that we all have to do our part to be part of the enforcement, picture. I will say anecdotally that in my neighborhood in Wailea Kahala, I hadn't seen a lot of police presence over the last several weeks, but in recent days, I've been seeing a lot more police cars driving through, and that, boots on the ground type of presence, I think has, sent a message throughout just our little neighborhood. And I hope that that will, that is, I assume that that's happening, across the island as well. So I do anticipate that this time the enforcement will be much more serious than it has been in the past. And it's never been easier now to report a violation. And with all of those community eyes, I am cautiously optimistic that this shutdown will be more effective than the ones in the past.
Great. Yeah, I'm hoping that we can all band together as a city and a state to really abide by the orders. And if it takes additional HPD patrolling and making sure people are following rules, and maybe that's what we need. Another question that's popped up a couple times and in I guess a little bit different manners, but let me just read this question to you. It says, many of us represent building owners or managers that are dealing with commercial tenant shutdowns. There's been a strong rally by the governor to provide financial assistance to the tenants, as many are small businesses. Are there discussions on how to help landlords?
Yeah, so, our office, we've received a number of calls and emails on this exact topic. And, let me just explain it this way. So one of the real, because we are so focused right now on, the immediate effects of the pandemic, residential leases are, kind of front and center right now. The legislature, we did pass in our second reconvene a bill that would appropriate $100 million to give residential landlords either $500 a month or 50% of the rent, whichever is lower, of the tenants who apply. And that project or that program was slated to come into effect on August 1st. Well, August 1st has come and gone. We're now approaching September 1st, and there's been no rollout of this program at all. There's no instructions on how to apply. There's been no selection of a vendor. It's been completely, silent basically since the legislature came back into session. So if even, people, residential landlords are not getting relief or some, form of government assistance, I would say that the commercial landlords are, behind the residential ones. And that is, very, very frustrating because, as was already mentioned, both residential and commercial landlords in Hawaii are operating in very, very thin margins. In residential in particular, we have a disproportionately high percentage of mom and pop individual landlords. These are not, large mainland corporations. And that to see so many, residential landlords on the cusp has been very, very distressing to me. And that's true in our commercial sector as well. We have a lot of mom and pop commercial landlords who are, really on the brink at this point. And the lack of state action with the funding is really frustrating.
Thank you, Senator. Looking at our time, I think we're just about to the end, but I saw a couple of follow-up questions on the Aloha Homes program. So if you don't mind, I'll just jump ahead to those and just ask you, first, is the Aloha Homes program, has it been successful, or a similar concept been successful in other states? And if so, how do you ensure that the homes remain affordable over time?
Yeah, so this type of program has not been tried in the United States. The direct model for this program is Singapore's highly successful public housing program, which houses 82% of their population. And, I've led a number of delegations. I've led now 2 delegations to Singapore and 1 to Vienna, which also has a successful rental-based model. And we haven't copied and pasted everything. There's a lot that Singapore does that we simply cannot replicate here. But I would say that the foundation of Singapore's housing model, Vienna's housing model, all of the housing models that have succeeded everywhere that we've studied around the world, there's only one magic trick. And that magic trick is building enough supply to meet demand. And so what I would say in response to the second question is, as long as you build enough supply to meet demand, there is no need to keep affordable housing affordable. And it's tough for me to explain, and I've tried to think of many analogies to try to explain this concept, but this is the closest I've gotten. Think about the car market, okay? Do we have an affordable car shortage in Hawaii? I would think that most people would say that no, we don't have a shortage of affordable cars in Hawaii. And why is that? It's not because new cars are cheap. In fact, the cheapest new cars these days are going for, $20,000, give or take, which is, kind of expensive. Certainly a homeless person couldn't afford a $20,000 new car. But with cars, unlike housing, anyone can bring in as many cars as they want anytime. So if cars start to become a problem, dealers can simply import more, individuals can simply import more, and the market of supply and demand balances out. Now, when you restrict new car importations, that does cause cars to become more expensive over time in the secondary market. And the example that really is very famous there is Cuba. The new car market in Cuba is highly restricted because of the United States embargo. And as a result, old cars from the 1950s have appreciated in value greatly over the years. They shouldn't be appreciating in value. Right? They should have gone to zero as they do in a place like Hawaii, where there's no restrictions on car supply. And that is basically the situation that we have with housing in Hawaii. Because supply of housing is so restricted, really old, crappy houses do appreciate in value over time. And that's not really something that you see, on the mainland as much. And, if you go to a city like Houston has actually no zoning. So anyone can build anything, anywhere, anytime in Houston, right? The median home price is closer to $250,000 in Houston because more supply is always being added. That does mean that existing supply doesn't appreciate in value the way that it does here in Hawaii, where, as we've already explained, residential landlords for decades saw, just mom and pops just saw that, residential real estate was a very reliable source of income and a very reliable way to see, investment savings appreciate over time. That is a product of the distorted housing supply in Hawaii. And so on a final note, I would add that in Singapore, we were able to tour a project, the Pinnacle at Duxton. You should look it up, it's beautiful. It's a 50-story series of 7 towers with sky bridges linking the 26th and 50th floors. It looks like a luxury resort. It doesn't look like public housing at all. Those units were initially selling in the range of $280,000 about 10 to 20 years ago. And today, those units are now trading in the secondary market. Public housing units are trading for over $1 million.
Wow.
So we actually do want housing to appreciate. We don't want the affordable housing to stay affordable because we want people to desire it. We want people to take care of their units. We don't want people to treat the units, as just, cheap housing for poor people. We want them to treat them as really desirable, well-integrated communities for people of all incomes. And the only way to achieve that, I think, is by having a strong price signal, to have prices appreciate so that people can say, hey, wait a minute, this is not just, dumpy housing for poor people. This is housing that everyone can live in, that is a good investment, that will appreciate over time, and that, that everyone's going to take care of because they own this product now. It's not just a short-term rental.
Senator Chang, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate hearing from you and getting your Mana'o on so many different subjects, and for your work in helping with the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you on behalf of all the CCIM and BOMA members.
Well, thank you so much to CCIM and to BOMA for having me today. And thank you, Mike, for doing a great job moderating.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
for joining. We'll be sending out a thank you email afterwards. We'd love to hear what you thought about today's webinar, and you can certainly email us at info@ccimhawaii.org, and I'll forward those also to BOMA. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Senator Chang. Thank you, Mike. Aloha.